Let me take you on a journey all the way back to the 2020 Formula 1 season. It was the status quo all year long, with Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes absolutely dominating the sport, which is what they did best back in this era. But in this Mercedes run season, out came one race that threw everything in the air. 4 DNFs, a double Ferrari DNF, which for any new F1 fans out there coming into the sport, get used to it, it happens a lot. And a top 3 consisting of some of the craziest names to share the podium ever. This is the 2020 Italian Grand Prix. Now, before we actually get to this Grand Prix, there's a few things that you need to know heading into this race weekend. So if we go all the way back to the start of the season for the Australian Grand Prix, there was a contagious disease going around that had everyone staying indoors, but importantly for the story, it got so bad that F1 was actually cancelled. Heading into the first race in Australia, there were big question marks whether the race was going to happen, and then on media day it came out that McLaren had a worker who had COVID, and because of that they had to withdraw from the race, and then a few hours later the entire race was cancelled. And from this it just continued to spiral out of control. From the 22 races on the calendar we had for 2020, 12 of them were cancelled. The season would take an extra 4 months to actually start, with people not even knowing if it was going to at the time, as from March all the way to the start of July we didn't have any F1, until finally Austria was the first race that could be held, and then from July to December we crammed in 17 race weekends, with quite a few duplicate Grand Prix weekends with different names. So you had Bahrain and Sakir, you had Austria and Styria, those sorts of things, because there wasn't enough Grand Prix weekends. So it was actually just incredible that we even got to 17 Grand Prix weekends after the start to 2020 that we had. So just for the Italian Grand Prix to have taken place in itself was an absolute miracle. And then we have to actually talk about the main character of this race,
Pierre Gasly!
So let me take you back one more year to 2019, where Daniel Ricciardo had just left Red Bull to go over to Renault, and with that a spot at Red Bull had opened up. And this was brilliant news for the new upcoming rising talent of Pierre Gasly in F1, with Gasly getting the call up to join Verstappen as his teammate. And safe to say, it didn't go to plan. By August of the same year, Gasly had been demoted back down to Toro Rosso at the time, later to be called AlphaTauri, later to be called Racing Bulls. Yeah, I wonder when Red Bull will stop changing their second team's name. But this was all because Gasly had lost 10-1 in both head-to-heads in the races and qualifying between Verstappen, and he was 118 points behind Verstappen at this point in the season heading into Belgium. Now, quite funnily, I actually mentioned this in one of my other videos that I previously made. To today's standard, that's actually a pretty good job from Gasly, staying that close to Verstappen. But this was before all of the big Red Bull second driver issues, and it would just get worse and worse and worse, with a slight brief moment of niceness from Perez, but then we've seen Lawson and Tsunoda now, and Gasly, yeah, it looked actually half decent now, but in 2019 that was not good enough for Red Bull. So for 2020, Gasly stayed put in that new AlphaTauri team, really hoping that he could save his career by either getting back into the Red Bull second seat or potentially just showing what he had to other teams to get a move elsewhere on the grid. And that now brings us to the 2020 Italian Grand Prix. Yeah, so qualifying, especially Q1, was absolute chaos. You had everything going normal, you know, nothing too crazy happening. Vettel was in the elimination zone for Q1, but Ferrari had a dreadful year that season, so it wasn't too crazy. However, then going into the final minute of qualifying, yeah, everyone seemed to lose their marbles and forget how to race each other, because there was about 6 cars heading into the first corner starting their quali laps. And of course, because of this, it did not work out. Everyone was blocking everyone and all of them screwed over each other's laps. The first heartbreak because of this had to be the GOAT Latifi, ending in P20. Oh, my GOAT. He should have been P1. It was disgusting, absolutely disgusting, considering how brilliant that Williams was this season. My 2020 champion. And then because of all of the squabbling as well, Vettel couldn't set a better lap, meaning he started the race in P17. And Albon, in the second Red Bull seat, just about scraped through in P15. very, very close from losing it as well. But to be fair for Ferrari, like I mentioned, it wasn't a great year for them, and Leclerc wouldn't do much better, being eliminated in 13th place heading into Q2, and the rest of the grid was pretty much normal. Then finally heading into Q3, we had a lot of normalcy heading back into the quali session. And well, when I say normalcy, I mean absolute Mercedes domination. Hamilton would put it on pole by 8/10 to the next non-Mercedes car of Carlos Sainz in P3. 8/10 to P3 is insane to today's F1 standards. And realistically, Red Bull were the odd ones out, with Monza not being a brilliant track for them with their 2020 car, with Verstappen only managing 5th and Albon in 9th. And for our main man Gasly, he would start in 10th. 5 red lights and away we go for the Italian Grand Prix. Hamilton was able to get an absolute brilliant start, but the same could not be said for his teammate Valtteri Bottas, as Sainz would jump him heading into turn 1, dropping down to P3, but the biggest winner heading into turn 1 had to be Lando Norris, as he would go from P6 all the way to P3 briefly, as he would go side by side with Valtteri Bottas, but Bottas would be able to keep it going ahead of Lando Norris heading out of turn 2. Albon then had an incident further back on the grid, dropping him right down to the back, and then heading into the second sector of the first lap, it wasn't over for Bottas, as Norris would get a brilliant run onto him, being able to go side by side, getting past Valtteri Bottas, and because of this, Bottas's line was not ideal, and eventually he would go wide, letting Perez past, and then a few corners later, heading into the Ascari chicane, would then get overtaken by Daniel Ricciardo, dropping down to P6. So at the end of the first lap, we had Hamilton leading, with Sainz second and Norris third, and McLaren 2-3, which back in the day did not happen every single race weekend, so it was insane, with Perez in 4th, Ricciardo in 5th, and Bottas now all the way down to 6th. But after this lap, everything would start to quiet down a little bit more, as Hamilton would start to pull away a big gap to Carlos Sainz in 2nd, which was to be expected in that Mercedes, and everyone sort of just ended up in one big DRS train, which tends to happen quite a bit in Monza, with K-Mag really being the only odd one out, as he had an issue on lap 1 and had to pit early on. Then on lap 6, Vettel would be the first retirement of the race, as he would go to overtake Russell for P17, but then his brakes would fail on his Ferrari, pretty much ending what could have been a worse home Grand Prix for Ferrari. And only 13 laps later, we would get our second DNF of Kevin Magnussen, as he would have mechanical issues and he would not be able to reach the pits in time, which actually would bring out the first safety car. Where on lap 20, we would see Lewis Hamilton taking advantage of this safety car and going into the pits for his first pit stop of the race. But interestingly enough, no one in the top 10 followed through. And you're starting to think, why the hell did no one follow Hamilton into the pits? Sainz is now leading the race with Hamilton 2nd in a McLaren sandwich with Norris 3rd. However, it came to light that the pit was closed. Because of where Kevin Magnussen left his car stranded, the pit stop was closed when Hamilton went into the pits, meaning it was completely illegal what Hamilton did, which would end up with Hamilton getting a 10-second stop and go penalty for the next time he went into the pits. So once the pit lane actually opened up properly on lap 22, it was a cram fest to get into the pits. You had practically all of the top 10 going into the pits with McLaren double stack. Bottas, Ricciardo, Verstappen, Ocon, Perez, all of them heading into the pits to get onto some fresh rubber. But interestingly enough, a lot of other drivers decided to go for the opposite strategy, because a lot of them had started on the hard tyres, such as Gasly, Raikkonen, Latifi. So we had a situation where it was now Hamilton leading, needing to take his penalty next time he went into the pits, so technically wasn't leading, with Stroll in 2nd, technically 1st place, Gasly 3rd, all the way with people who hadn't pit to Latifi in 7th, with the McLarens now with a lot of work to do in 8th and 9th. And what came next was only a matter of time to happen, as we would see Sainz and Norris pierce their way through the field as everyone would try to hold on for their tyres. Or did it? Because actually what happened was a few laps later, after Sainz and Norris had only got past Latifi, Leclerc had a massive crash heading into the final corner, which would end up bringing out the safety car again. And it was such a bad crash, it would actually end up with the race being postponed with a red flag. This now led all of those early gainers of a Sainz, Norris, Perez, Ricciardo, all of these drivers who had pitted, Bottas included, back in the midfield of the pack. And all of the drivers who hadn't pitted, now on the safety car restart, didn't need to. 5 red lights and away we go again for the Italian Grand Prix on lap 28. Stroll had a terrible start. So nothing new here, dropping from 2nd to 5th, almost rear-ending Raikkonen in the process, allowing Sainz to actually get past him, as they would have a massive ding-dong throughout that entire lap. But Stroll would actually then re-overtake Sainz, heading into the Ascari chicane. Then on lap 29, Hamilton eventually came in to serve his penalty, dropping all the way back to the end of the grid, which was to be expected, leaving the top 6 now Gasly in 1st, Raikkonen 2nd, Giovinazzi and the Alfa Romeo Sauber in 3rd, Stroll 4th, Sainz 5th, and Norris 6th. What the hell even is this top 6? But hey, it wouldn't last long, as Stroll would eventually get overtaken by Carlos Sainz, as Sainz looked absolutely rapid, getting up to P4, and then when Giovinazzi eventually had to pit himself, Sainz would then go up to P3. And it really did look like it was Sainz to now lose. He was much quicker than Gasly and Raikkonen in that McLaren. And coming into lap 34, 19 laps to go, Sainz would absolutely send it on Kimi Raikkonen, getting the job done with all sights now on Pierre Gasly in 1st place. But looking behind Carlos Sainz, we then had Raikkonen completely falling off a cliff as he could not hold on to his tyres, as Stroll would overtake him for 3rd, and Norris would then follow suit, with Kimi Raikkonen eventually having to pit. Oh, and by the way, while all of this was going on at the front, Hamilton, even after that penalty, had managed to make his way all the way up to P7 at the end of the race, re-overtaking Esteban Ocon and getting the fastest lap of the race as well. Lewis Hamilton was just absolutely incredible in this era of F1, and I think people do forget that now because of him getting older in that Ferrari. Not ideal. Hamilton was an absolute beast in 2020. But back up to the front, we now only had 2 laps left, and Gasly was holding on for dear life with Sainz behind him. Sainz had been 1 to 2 seconds behind him for quite a while now, and eventually Sainz was able to break into the DRS zone, 1 second behind Gasly. And from this point onwards, Gasly had to produce some of the best pace of his career to keep Carlos Sainz behind. But even with this immense pressure from Carlos Sainz behind, Pierre Gasly just had to hold on a little bit longer, and a little bit longer is exactly what he did. Coming round the last corner, heading home for an insane race win. Coming across the line, Sainz could not do anything more to break down Gasly, and Pierre Gasly would become a Formula 1 race winner. And to pour salt in the Red Bull wound, Red Bull would have a 15th place and a DNF for Verstappen. Gasly 1st, Sainz 2nd, and Stroll 3rd. Still to this day, potentially one of the craziest F1 podiums we have ever had. Comment down below any other crazy podiums, because this one surely has to be in the top 5. But for Gasly, this would just be such a special race win. From everything that had happened to him throughout that last few years, with the demotion from Red Bull, from him losing one of his best friends in F2, Antoine Hubert, fighting for a spot in F1, for all of it to come to this monumental achievement, becoming France's first race winner since Panis in 1996, marking a special day for the entire nation. And although Gasly has not won an F1 race since then, for me, it's only a matter of time till it happens again. Surely one season Alpine will have a half-decent car, and if anyone can get a shock result, for me, it is always going to be Pierre Gasly. Thank you for watching, everyone. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this recap of the 2020 Monza Grand Prix. And as always, enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye bye.